Good morning. I'm Will Miller, president of the Wowoce Foundation. Thank you for joining us this morning as we're live streaming the release of the final evaluative report of the Wowoce Foundation's Principal Pipeline Initiative. With us today at Baruch College in New York City are 200 school and district leaders, university partners, researchers, policymakers, and leaders of national education associations. We want to welcome the more than 1,000 of you who've registered online. We're pleased to be here today to share new evidence on the effectiveness of principal pipelines and hear from school chiefs of the districts participating in this initiative about their experiences. I'd like to acknowledge the extraordinary work of the 6 large school districts in this initiative: Charlotte, Mecklenburg, North Carolina; Denver, Colorado; Gwinnett County, Georgia; Hillsborough County, Florida; New York City; and Prince George's County, Maryland. All of them successfully developed principal pipelines, which have led all of us to a deeper understanding of their benefits for students and districts. Let me also recognize Brenda Turnbull and her team from Policy Studies Associates and Susan Gates and her team from the RAND Corporation. Together, they conducted an ambitious multi-year study of the pipeline, analyzing how the districts implemented them and the benefits that resulted. We'll hear more from Ms. Gates in a moment. We are live tweeting this event and encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Principal Pipeline, all one word. Following the panel discussion and some brief wrap-up remarks, we will take questions from the audience here at Baruch and from those of you online. If you are online, please submit your questions by clicking on the speech bubble in the upper right-hand corner of your video feed and then typing in the chat box. We're unlikely to have time to get to all of your questions this morning, so we will catalog them and produce a follow-up document of answers, which we will post on wowocefoundation.org/principalpipeline. As context for the study results to be announced this morning, I'd like to briefly review why principal leadership matters. For more than 2 decades of research, we know that leadership is second only to classroom instruction among school-based factors affecting student achievement, and that an effective principal is a multiplier of effective teaching. Principals are critical to turning around struggling schools. In fact, a review of the literature concluded, quote, "There are virtually no documented instances of troubled schools being turned around without effective leadership." Teacher turnover is lower in schools led by high-quality principals, and this is especially true in disadvantaged schools. This cumulative evidence base is reflected in the recently updated Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, published by the National Policy Board for Educational Leadership. They spell out 10 essential practices based on the decades of research into the principalship. Many of you in the audience today participated in the creation of these voluntary national standards. Now, the subject of today's live stream, the Principal Pipeline Initiative, was launched in 2011. At that time, the Wowoce Foundation had over 10 years of experience working with 15 states and 12 districts on school leadership. During this period, we learned a lot about what it takes to be an effective principal and how principal preparation programs can be improved to develop this kind of leader. What we did not know is what it would take for a large district to develop a cadre of effective principals at the scale of an entire district, and if they did, would it lift student achievement? At that time, the evidence base suggested at least 4 components would be necessary to achieve what we came to call a principal pipeline: leader standards that define the job as an instructional leader, evidence-based pre-service preparation programs done in partnerships with districts to ensure that training reflected the realities the principal would face on the ground, more selective hiring and placement of novice principals, and aligned evaluation and support in the early years in the job. We looked around the country and found districts that had 1 or more of these components in place, but nowhere could we find all 4, implemented in a comprehensive, aligned, and systematic way. Where the individual components had been done well, they were clearly adapted to the local circumstances, suggesting there was no need for a prescriptive one-size-fits-all approach. Rather, the evidence suggested it would be better for districts to develop a comprehensive strategy aligned with the evidence, but implemented in a way that made the most sense to them given their local context and history. So this raised for us an intriguing question. If all these components were put in place in ways that made sense for the local context, along with the appropriate system supports, would it move the needle for children, especially for the least advantaged ones, at the scale of an entire large district? So our foundation designed and implemented a 7-year, $85 million initiative to find out. We funded 6 large districts willing to test out this new approach, a major research study to develop lessons and evidence for the field, and the sharing of results broadly through events such as this one today. And with that context in mind, I'd like now to introduce Susan Gates, Senior Economist at the RAND Corporation and lead researcher on the RAND report that's being released today. Ms. Gates will walk you through the highlights of RAND's new findings on the outcomes of pipelines, as well as how they were carried out as documented by Policy Studies Associates. Together, these reports provide an answer to our question. At RAND, Ms. Gates applies economic theory and methods to help policymakers identify effective practices and make better decisions on a wide range of topics. She also directs the Office of Research Quality Assurance and is a professor at the Pardee RAND Graduate School. We've been privileged to have benefited from her research on school leadership for well over a decade and have enjoyed sharing the journey with her so far. Please welcome Susan Gates.
Well, thank you for that introduction and also for the opportunity to share a high-level overview of the findings from the final evaluation report of the Principal Pipeline Initiative with this tremendous audience. The evaluation teams at Policy Studies Associates and RAND have been working since the launch of the initiative in 2011 to document the initiative's implementation and effects in 6 large districts that we refer to as pipeline districts. The final report being released today reveals that principal pipelines are a feasible, affordable, and effective way for large districts to improve schools. In my brief remarks today, I'll elaborate on the 3 key findings that are reflected in the title of our report. And at the end, I will let you know where you can go to get more information about the implementation and effects of principal pipelines. In his introductory remarks, Will described the 4 components of principal pipelines. They're comprised of leader standards, pre-service training, selective hiring and placement, and evaluation and support. Our study found that it is feasible to implement all 4 components of a principal pipeline at scale in large districts. The pipeline districts did it. The pipeline districts were selected by the Wallace Foundation in part based on prior experience with at least some of the pipeline components. This chart summarizes the extent to which each of the districts had each component of the pipeline in place as of school year 2010-2011, which we consider to be a baseline or pre-pipeline year. In this chart, dark orange shading reflects that a component was in place in a district, while the white cells reflect instances where a component was not in place. At a glance, you can readily see that at the start of the initiative, no district had all 4 components in place. Now, fast forward to the end of the initiative in 2016-2017. You can clearly see in this chart the predominance of dark orange and the absence of white, reflecting that by this time, all districts had all components in place or partially in place. The second key finding from our study is that pipelines are affordable. It didn't cost a lot for the districts to do this work. We found that pipeline districts spent less than 0.5% of their budgets to operate and enhance their pipelines. And that's not the over and above cost of enhancing the pipelines during the initiative. It includes spending on business as usual activities that they were already undertaking prior to the launch of the initiative. On a cost per student basis, this amounted to roughly $42 per student per year on average across the pipeline districts. Now, the most exciting finding from our work published today is that the pipelines are effective. They benefited districts, schools, and students. To look at effectiveness, we compared changes in outcomes in pipeline and non-pipeline schools. We studied over 1,100 schools in pipeline districts that got a newly placed principal during the study timeframe and compared changes in outcomes in those schools with changes in outcomes in over 6,300 matched comparison schools. These comparison schools were similar to the pipeline schools in many ways, including the fact that they got a newly placed principal in the same year. But they were located in non-pipeline districts in the same state. In characterizing the effect of the initiative, a positive effect means that the change in outcomes was more favorable in pipeline schools than in comparison schools. If we're talking about student achievement, that could be because of larger growth in achievement, smaller declines in achievement, or a combination of the two. This chart summarizes the average effects of principal pipelines in math and reading across all 6 districts, 2 years after the placement of a new principal and 3 or more years after the placement of a new principal, relative to a baseline year of 2010-2011. Effects are measured in percentile points. The effects are all positive and statistically significant, meaning that schools in pipeline districts with a newly placed principal outperformed comparison schools. I'll direct your attention to the highest bar, which reflects our estimate of the effect on reading after 3 or more years. The 6.2 percentile point effect size for reading means that if a pipeline and a non-pipeline school were both at the median or 50th percentile of the achievement distribution in the baseline year, 3 years after the new principals were placed, the pipeline school would be at the 56th percentile, while the non-pipeline school would still be at the median or 50th percentile. Now, these findings are statistically significant, meaningful, widespread, and also unusual. The main effects that we showed on the prior slide reflected the average findings across district, and these are positive and statistically significant for the 6 districts taken together. When we drilled down to look specifically at different groups of schools, we found positive findings for schools serving different grade levels, specifically in math at the elementary, middle, and high school level, and in reading at the elementary and middle school level. We also found positive effects for different cohorts of pipeline schools, where cohorts are defined in terms of the school year in which the new principals were placed. Now, the fact that there were positive effects for even the earliest cohorts of newly placed principals in our study means that the effects kicked in quickly. Finally, we found positive and statistically significant effects for schools in the lowest quartile of the state's achievement distribution. This is an important finding because these are the schools that are often left out of the benefits of broad interventions. We are not aware of any other comprehensive district-wide intervention for which there is evidence of positive effects on student achievement of this magnitude. Sorry, tagline. Now, I've focused to now on the effects that we measured with regard to student achievement, but we also found effects on principal retention. It's well known that principal turnover is costly for districts and disruptive for schools and for students. What our study found is that for every 100 newly placed principals in pipeline districts, the pipeline districts saw 6 fewer losses after 2 years and 8 fewer losses after 3 years compared with non-pipeline districts. Now, in the interest of keeping this research overview brief, I left out a lot of details about the study's methodology, limitations, and other findings. But have no fear. We have just released a well-documented final implementation and effects report. That report builds on a suite of prior reports by Policy Studies Associates and RAND. So those of you who are looking for more information have plenty to look at. Each of these reports are available at the Wallace Foundation website dedicated to the Principal Pipeline Initiative at the URL that's here on the slide. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Will.
Thank you. So it's now my privilege to introduce the moderator of today's discussion, Sonja Santelises. Ms. Santelises has spent close to 30 years focused on building high-quality teaching and learning to help students excel, including her tenure as the Chief Academic Officer for Baltimore City Public Schools from 2010 to 2013. She served for 3 years as Vice President of K-12 Policy and Practice at the Education Trust, a nonprofit organization focused on closing the achievement gap experienced disproportionately by African American, Latino, and Native students and students from low-income families. In 2016, she returned to Baltimore City Public Schools as its Chief Executive. Please join me in welcoming Sonja Santelises, who will introduce the panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Will. And I will just say that it is wonderful to be here today. I think the impact of this report and this study is just being felt. And it is my privilege to be here with folks who I actually consider to be colleagues of mine, who will give us the opportunity today to look deeper inside some of these results and really get a sense of what does this work look like at the district level. And so with us today, I have the pleasure, again, of, like I said, introducing folks who I really consider to be colleagues and partners in the work. First, to my most right, we have Richard Carranza, who is the Chancellor of New York City Department of Education. During Mr. Carranza's nearly 30 years in education, he has served in virtually every role in cities across the country, having begun his career as a high school bilingual social studies and music teacher, a principal, and most recently as superintendent in Houston, Texas, preceded by his time in the same role in San Francisco, California. Now, for me, what makes Chancellor Carranza so special is that he always talks about the fact that he is the son of a sheet metal worker and a hairdresser and a grandson of Mexican immigrants. He credits his public school education for putting him on a path to college and a successful career. He is a fluent Spanish speaker and an accomplished mariachi musician. I told you that was the fun part. Also, we have with us one of my colleagues, Jeff, and actually, I'm going to go to Monica Goldson next, and she's next in line. We get the chance to serve together in Maryland, and she is the interim chief executive officer for Prince George's County Public Schools, Maryland. She has spent her 27-year career in the district, moving from classroom to district leadership. She previously served as deputy superintendent for teaching and learning, where she led a team that supports schools in the areas of curriculum and instruction, special education, testing, college and career readiness, and student services. Welcome, CEO Goldson. Next, we have Jeff Eakins, who is superintendent of Hillsborough County Public Schools since 2015, and he has been an advocate for children throughout his career, seeking to provide support systems and educational programming that enable children to achieve a promising future. Superintendent Eakins began his career as a fifth grade teacher in 1987 and became a principal in 2001. In 2006, he became director of Hillsborough's Title I program, and in 2013 was appointed deputy superintendent for the district before becoming superintendent in 2015. And then finally, we have Alvin Wilbanks to my immediate left, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Superintendent of Gwinnett Public County Schools, one of the largest serving school chiefs in the nation. He was named to that position in 1996. At that time, he was serving concurrently as the district's Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Continuous Improvement, and as president of Gwinnett Technical College, which he opened as its president in 1984. CEO Wilbanks came to Gwinnett County from the Georgia Department of Education's Industrial Development Unit. He also was employed as a teacher and administrator in DeKalb County schools for a number of years. Since 2000, 2 Georgia governors and the U.S. Secretary of Education have called on his expertise in crafting significant education reform legislation at the state and federal levels. Please join me again in welcoming folks that I know, even with all of their credentials at their core, work on behalf of all of our young people every day. Please welcome them again. And so, Superintendent Wilbanks, it would be great if you could get us started and just talk a bit about how important these findings are for you and the work you and your team are doing in Gwinnett County.
Sure, thank you. First of all, I think the findings are really important for all 6 districts, but for Gwinnett County Public Schools, it provided proof positive that the efforts and cost in both human resources and physical resources can and does make a difference in student achievement. But success is not automatic. And not only do you have to do the right thing, you have to do the right thing right. Such as adhering to rigorous leader standards, having principles exhibit what those look like on a daily basis, providing high-quality pre-service preparation by selecting candidates who have the knowledge and skills needed to be successful, using information derived from data in hiring and assigning candidates to schools for which there is a match for their personal knowledge base, their skill set, as well as talents that the school needs, and providing on-the-job support and evaluation that helps ensure the new principal is successful, especially for the first-time principals. And this often results in providing some coaching or monitoring for a period of time after they are on their first job. These are the right things to do, but again, you must do the right things right. Your program that you provide must be implemented with the right content, experiences, evaluations, and ongoing support. Thanks to the Wallace Foundation and the Principal Pipeline Institute, a very well-designed, implemented, and evaluated program existed. Just as important was the commitment of Wallace to see this initiative through. For 7 years, it has committed to making the Principal Pipeline Initiative a success because it is one of the most important things that can be done to improve public schools. Leadership matters. Great principals have a huge impact on student achievement, a positive school climate, and ensuring quality and effective instructions are occurring in every classroom in the building. Gwinnett County Public Schools is in a better position today to have a pipeline of qualified people to lead our schools than we were 7 years ago. Were there any surprises? Yes. Sustainability of the districts and the Wallace Foundation that's been going on for 7 years. Every district stayed. Even there was change in leadership, they stayed. Probably a credit to the project directors as well as the district itself. And then the other things that I think was important Wallace. Originally, we thought it would be 4, maybe 5 years. It turned out to be 7. They stuck with us because they knew there was something good going on. But more importantly, the result should produce dividends for young people. So, the 7 years that we participated in the Principal Pipeline Initiative, not necessarily was anything that we ever thought about doing. But when the opportunity came, then we realized that we really support, not only did we support the initiative, but we received a lot of gain from the networking that we had with the other 5 districts, and I can't really say enough for that. So in the beginning, we obviously had some people that were a little reluctant, but I can assure you today, Gwinnett County Public Schools is sold on the process and the program. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. Now, moving to Superintendent Eakins. By the way, so that you all know, it's hard for me calling them by their title because I know each of them by their first name. So if I stumble a little bit, it's because I'm used to just saying Joe. So Superintendent Eakins, one of the things that was an important finding, and I know something you commented on very early, was the fact that the systemic impact of this work. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. First, I'd like to start off just by thanking the Wowoce Foundation and all of our many partners and our colleagues in this room for pushing us. You know, we were a district, we just needed to push, right, to break certain barriers and to be able to get over certain hurdles. We just needed everyone to kind of push along with us. So this was so important for our work. But just as Superintendent Wilbanks said, if you're going to do the right thing right, it can't be done in isolation. Everything really you have to build out the entire system to really do it right. Just like a pipeline, the purpose of a pipeline is at the end of that pipeline to produce an effective result. And in our principal pipeline, that effective result is student achievement. And so in order to start with the end in mind, start with great student achievement and working backwards and building out the pipeline so that you ultimately have all the systems really informing the pipeline, supporting the pipeline appropriately is key to this work. From student achievement that means you have to have great teachers providing great instruction. That means you have to have great leaders at schools, and that's what this pipeline develops. Great leaders at those schools, helping those teachers be the best that they can for students. But ultimately in Hillsborough County, one of the things we saw that all pipelines have to have is an alignment all the way from beginning to end. And so part of our alignment process was looking at our principal supervisors and really ensuring that our great principals that were being developed in the pipeline were going to be supported with principal supervisors who really understood their work. We had to re-interview all of our principal supervisors and to really get the right people with the right lens in place to be able to support that work. And then ultimately, through our chief of schools and all of our divisions across Hillsborough County, they have to be on that same page. And what does it mean? If we know that this pipeline work and having a great leader in schools, supporting teachers, ultimately supporting students, is the main thing, is the right thing, then we have to make sure the whole system helps to support that work. And that means we have to kind of step back, and we sometimes have to say, what is not helping this process? Certainly placing leaders was a challenge, so we developed a leader tracking tool in order to do that work for us, bringing data to the table and saying, you know what, we've been sitting around the table for years thinking who we thought was the right leader for schools, but the data wasn't necessarily informing us that was the work. So we had to really step back and build a system around what that looks like. And then, from there, really developing those standards for our principal supervisors, helping them really understand, what do you need to look for? How can you really assist that principal being all that they can be at the site level? So that principal supervisor developing standards, going through the training with our partners on that, Cross and Joftis, was key to that particular work. And then ultimately now going to our entire school district, our systems, HR, hiring. How are we ensuring we're breaking down barriers so that our principals have the very best candidates in front of them to be able to hire great teachers, in their classrooms every day. Resourcing our schools differently, making sure that all of our principals and our teachers have the resources they need to ultimately provide support for our students. That was key, and that means financially we have to look all across our district and change the way we budget our system. And then really this has really helped us to inform our school turnaround work in Hillsborough County, because you have to have undoubtedly the greatest leader at our most vulnerable school. So we have to make sure that we use this work to create with our partners at USF and University of Tampa, an EDS program in turnaround, specifically in turnaround. So we have 40 to 50 leaders now in our school district that has an EDS and turnaround leadership. We've built that capacities to ultimately go in and do great work for our students. But it all started in 2011 with Hillsborough County entering into the principal pipeline with the Wowoce Foundation, and we just couldn't be more appreciative.
That's great. And one of the things that's interesting that you brought up was this idea of turnaround and some of your most challenging schools. I'm going to ask CEO Goldson. We know that kind of in the pursuit of equity, one of the most striking findings in this study was the particularly significant improvement that was realized for schools that served really some of the most under-resourced schools with some of the most challenging situations. And so could you talk a little bit about how you really see those results or that impact within Prince George's County and your team's work there?
Yes. Good morning. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about Prince George's County Public Schools. And we represent 91% children of color. And really, this is the core work and the decisions that we make every day. So to have research that comes out and supports the fact that we really worked on a pipeline that would help to improve student achievement is extremely important. It's the core work that we do as CEOs and superintendents every day. What's also key, though, is that we focused on the leader standards, because ultimately that is truly what changes a manager into an instructional leader. And it's the focus and the work that we have to do every day where our principals are having true conversations and courageous conversations and giving effective feedback to their teachers when that teaching and learning is not up to par and taking place to have increased student achievement. The second piece of this, which was mentioned before, is true sustainability. And in this case, the research was done in 7 years. For Prince George's County, we're on our third superintendent in 7 years. And that's key and important because what we did was invested in a foundation to know that regardless of who's at the helm, we thought that this work was just that important, that it started down in an area where our project managers continued to sustain the work regardless of who was leading the district. And that's key in terms of making sure that you have sustainability. As CEOs and superintendents, we're all in a budget cycle right now, I'm sure, and getting close to the conclusion of it. And being able to prove now that for $42 per child, you have an opportunity to invest in human capital that will deliver improvement in student achievement. It's not a specific program. It's not a company that will be taken over by someone else. It's the true investment of the leaders that are in front of our children every day. That's another key component. And it's so, for me, continuing to promote our principal pipeline, making sure that my board members understand the relevancy of it. And then for us, really truly looking at what worked for our new teachers, our new principals, and the support we provided so that we can take it up a notch for our veteran principals who sometimes believe that they don't need to change but clearly have to.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And one of the things that we also know that I think is important that you talked about was this idea of the cost and to be able to be consistent across administrations. And so, Chancellor Carranza, when you think about the particular cost of principal retention and the fact that one of the major findings of this study was about the positive impact on retaining principals. Could you talk a little bit about how within New York City you really plan to take advantage of this finding?
Yes, so Sonja, thank you again. I want to welcome all of you to New York City. We want you to go and shop a lot, buy lots of stuff. Monica talked about we're in the budget cycle, help a brother out. So we want to welcome you to New York City. But I also want to thank the Wowoce Foundation because you rarely see this kind of an investment around the real work. So they could have pulled up a long time ago, especially when you have leadership transitions. So I really don't want to miss the opportunity to thank the Wowoce Foundation for their commitment. And then I also want to publicly thank two of my predecessors, Chancellor Walcott and Chancellor Farina. We are one of those systems that have had 3 leadership changes. over the course of this study. So in the year that I've been here, one of the things that I've been so impressed with is this particular way of work so that we're able to then empower the retention of good leaders in our schools. So for us, we want to continue to provide preparation opportunities for the bench. How do we build a bench so that as leaders have other opportunities within the organization, that we continue to bring people to the forefront that have the skill and the supports to be able to move into leadership positions and be successful. Part of that is culture. And one of the things that I think this report also, be really careful about what you read into it, because you're going to find it very powerful, is that every one of the districts involved have been able to build a culture in which there is this sense of we're here to help you. And my experience has been that, typically in a central administration, it's kind of like, I'm from the IRS, I'm here to help you with your taxes, right? I'm from the central office, I'm here to help you with your leadership growth. But to be able to change that is really critical. And I think you can't overlook that as we go forward. The notion that as a principal, you also have very specific individualized support for the circumstances in which you're leading is also critically important. You can't overlook that. And one of the other things that in New York City we're looking at, and I want to give credit to all my colleagues who have taken this work and really ramped it up, is that when you have a leadership change in the principalship, you have to look at it as an eHarmony moment. And by that I mean you can't just put anybody in there. You have to look at what are the conditions, what are the circumstances. Do you have somebody who has the right skill set? In many of these circumstances, in historically underserved communities, you need somebody that's going to be a social justice warrior, that is not going to take any prisoners, that is going to see success as more than just academic indicators. It's about culture. It's about the community. It's about empowering students. So you have to match the right leader with the right community, and then you have to couple that with the right kinds of supports. That's the kind of work that this report is giving us some good insight into, and that's what we're going to keep on moving. And how do we provide those growth opportunities for the bench so that, we only have 1,800 schools, so there's always a need for a leader. So for us, this is not just something we think about, this is critically important for us in our schools.
And I want you to know that I said to Richard, to the Chancellor earlier, whenever I have a bad day, I think, oh my God, but at least I don't have 1,800 schools. So if you just want to know just how much work they're lifting, that's a signal to that. Well, I will say, as someone who is leading a district and has a team where we are just building out the beginnings of the work that you all have done really so much in, one of the questions I have that it would be great if you all could just speak briefly to is talk about your partners, talk about folks outside of the district or people who came alongside with regard to getting this work up and going. So we can start over here again with you, Superintendent Wilbanks.
I'll start with the Wallace Foundation and the partners, the RAND Corporation, and as well as the policy associates, Susan. Susan can ask more questions than anyone I've ever met, and Susan's not very far behind that. But that provided them a lot of data. But I think the other partners, we have two, the University of Georgia, Albany State University that works with us, as well as Virginia State. And the districts here provide us a lot of leeway, and you can expand that into the districts that's working with the principal supervisors. We get information from them as well. So this has been a great, not just networking, but it's been a learning opportunity for us to really learn what others do. Occasionally somebody will come visit us, and we certainly are always proud for that to happen. But I think the partners, again, are the people that you depend on to give you feedback, to indicate to you things that they've been successful in, but also suggest how you might make some changes where the things that you're doing might be more successful.
Yeah, in Hillsborough, I mentioned a few of our partners already. I don't want to not mention our great project director, Tricia McManus, who really, has been through the entire 7 years as project director, and she's done an incredible job. And if everyone were just to listen to Tricia, everyone would be just fine. I mean, literally. But when you have a large system and you have to have a system, like I said earlier, to push your thinking, push your thinking, and rather than rehash the same ideas over and over again and still think you're going to get a better result, you need partners. You need partners in this work to really push you and get out of your comfort zone to do that. So, Tricia and her team brought together, several partners throughout this, the National School Innovation Project, through the SAM's work with Hillsborough County to really help our leaders, better know how to see their day, their daily work play out. The Convergence was the partner that came with our tracking tool and really came alongside of us and helped us develop the tracking tool to ultimately have the data available to make the right fit, those eHarmony matches, along the way. Cross and Joftis, when I came in as superintendent, they were the ones that really came along and helped to develop those standards for our area superintendents and our principal supervisors, and really helped to get the right people in those seats to really create that what was occurring before with the misalignment, right? We said pipelines have to have total alignment, and that was a misalignment in Hillsborough County. So we had to make sure that we had the right people in that seat to really make the work just take it to the next level. New Teacher Center was another partner alongside of us, training for new principals and our principal coaches. And then Metagerm really helped us with our AP mentoring program. And I said earlier, USF and University of Tampa, University of South Florida and University of Tampa, they've really come alongside of us to really do the work around turnaround. So those are, we can't do it in isolation. Wallace Foundation, thank you. You created the moment for us in Hillsborough County to kind of create what we have now. But those partners came alongside of us to really take it to the next level.
Great, thank you.
Yes, I mentioned it before, but our project managers and our Office of Talent Development, who really truly looked at ways to support our principals in a non-traditional way. All of our staff and human resources for thinking outside the box and breaking the cycle that we typically utilized to hire principals. And most folks won't say this publicly or admit it, but our labor partners, for our administrators, because to truly begin to focus on leader standards, doing a true selection process and making that eHarmony connection is important, but the evaluation process is also key. And so you can't do it if you don't have your labor partner on board, because other than that, it's a constant struggle and fight. And then just want to thank the Wallace Foundation for allowing us opportunities for true collaboration, where we really could go to each other and have conversations of what's working and what's not working, and then hearing solutions to the problems that we faced. When you're doing it by yourself, you're only talking to yourself about what works and what doesn't. But when you have other colleagues who said, I tried that, it didn't work, you're saving yourself some time. And so I appreciate having just the conversations with our colleagues.
Yeah, I would just add as well, Wallace Foundation, a critical partner, but I can't overemphasize the work of the New York City Leadership Academy and what they did to really help us build our in-house programs and develop our own capacity to sustain the work. They were critically important, continue to be key partners for us. But university partners, we have a wealth of partnerships in New York City. So I'm going to mention a few, and it's always like mentioning your relatives, right, at Thanksgiving. You're going to miss somebody. But right up front, Bank Street College, Fordham University, Queens College, Brooklyn College, Hunter College, Lehman College, College of Staten Island. All of these institutions have been critically important to us. And I also want to give a shout out to our Administrators Union, the CSA, because they also have been partners in understanding how we build these pipelines and really have been on board at promoting and helping us make them better.
Great. Well, it's interesting because one of the things that often gets discussed is what really is the role of districts when it comes to school improvement and, most importantly, reducing equity gaps, right, and increasing equitable access for young people regardless of the zip code in which they live. Is there anything or what strikes you I would say, from the findings in this study, that from the position of the district, you all would say is either a major takeaway or a major learning from these results about the district role, leadership role in driving improvement.
So I'll start. The data already showed that having a true instructional leader in front of our students is key, but now you have some data to actually truly support that myth, and you have it for your own district. So it's our own personal selling point of why it's so key. The takeaway was the student achievement piece, because ultimately that's what we do every day. We make decisions that impact children. And if we don't walk away from anything else, today, that to me is what's key. Because we've made an investment in adults that helps to drive teaching and learning regardless of their zip code. I have 207 schools, 134,000 students. And for us to have gains in mathematics and reading English language arts that has taken us a while to overcome is substantial.
I'll jump in as well. I think a district's role is that we know from the study that principal leadership is critically important. They are drivers. They are the drivers of change. But a principal doesn't exist in a vacuum. So the organization has to be very clear about what it believes in. What are the moral values? What are the professional values? What are you driving towards? Because if not, the danger is that you have then a confederation of independent schools that all happen to geographically be in the same area, rather than a unified school system that believes in something. And the something that you believe in should then drive how you select your principals, how you train your principals, how you support your principals, and how you build that capacity. So the lessons for us as a school system is really about how you then embed and how you robustly support those leaders that are carrying out the vision, the mission, and the goals of the school system.
Great, thank you. What I'm going to ask now is for each of you, and again, we'll start with the Superintendent Wilbanks and then work our way to the end. I'm going to ask each of you again, and I'm kind of being selfish up here as I sit up. For those of us who are at the beginning of our journey in building out our principal pipeline, just a minute, what's your advice? What would be the advice you would give to those of us, to other school districts that are just beginning this journey on principal pipeline work?
I would say anywhere you can get help in the right way, and certainly the district, in my opinion, has to be the unit of change. It has to be the entity that really drives the change through the district, and it's something that I think these type of programs really help us not just see what we're doing, but what others can do that really might make what we're doing better. Occasionally something we're doing may help them, but I think the sharing, really the networking, but more than just networking, the really getting down to what's really working and what isn't working, and doing the right things the right way.
Thank you.
So my advice would just stay committed. Keep the main thing, teaching, learning, and leading. That is the main thing in education. And I know we hear a lot of bells and whistles come our way all the time as CEOs and superintendents, in our roles. And it comes down to this. This study proves that. It's the main thing. And so I think as we move forward, this has literally saved Hillsborough County millions of dollars. Coming in as a superintendent with $100 million budget deficit and seeing the challenges, this has literally created an aligned pipeline of great teaching, learning, and leading, and supporting that system in a very efficient and effective way. You will get those results way more sustainable than a bell or a whistle.
I would say use your system data to explain why you have to change. Because in order to change a mindset, your own school community has to understand from whence you come. And then use this research to actually show why you need to move in this direction.
I'd say yes to everything my colleagues have said. I would only add the 4 areas in the study. People should spend some quality time in those 4 areas, looking through the lens of your own reality and where are you, and be really honest about where you are. But then I think it's critically important that you involve all stakeholders. So whether it's school-based staff, principals, supervisors, we've talked about labor partners, bring them to the table as you're starting this process. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have uniform leader standards and coherence about those standards. And then the Achilles heel of any system is clear communication. What are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? And then how can you be part of us getting it done?
Nice. Well, I want to thank you all just for sharing your journeys, your expertise, your learnings, so that the rest of us can benefit. We know that nationally, this impact has, I think this is one of the first times, I'll turn to Susan on that, I think this is probably one of the first times that this level of impact has been demonstrated. I know there's a lot of folks in this room who do the real work and say, you know, we always knew and believed that principal leadership matters. I think what this study is showing is that in a time of limited resources, when we often have to make tough decisions about what we will resource, I think we now have substantial data that shows that the investment in leadership principal pipelines, when done well, even in incredibly large school districts, can have and does have a direct impact on student achievement. And we know that in education there are things that come and things that go. But right now, the impact of this study, and I can say this also as a district leader who's just beginning this journey, we would do well to heed not only the results of this study, but also, frankly, my colleagues who have so willingly shared their journey. And so we will momentarily begin a question and answer period. So I want you all to begin with your think time, thinking about some questions you may want to ask. But before we jump right into that, I'm going to turn this back over to Mr. Miller, excuse me, to lead us through some other kind of major developments that have occurred around this study.
Thanks very much, and thank you again to the panelists for those wonderful insights. I will never think of matching a principal to a potential school in any other terms than eHarmony again. It's a fantastic metaphor. So we anticipate the results of this study will be of real interest to the field of K through 12 education, in part because a report from Policy Studies Associates released last month finds that more than 2/3 of the states are using school leadership as a major strategy to help advance student achievement in the highest needs schools. The vast majority of these states are focusing on sitting principals, which of course makes sense. Far fewer, however, are focused on preparing and supporting aspiring and new principals, perhaps because the benefits of doing so have not been as clear. Today's findings show that large districts have a reason to focus on preparing great principals as a comprehensive, feasible, affordable, and effective strategy to improve student achievement district-wide. The fact that the impact was large for schools in the lowest quartile of student achievement makes these findings particularly interesting and relevant. What's more, I'm pleased to announce that an independent assessment by Apt Associates, also posted on our website today, confirms that the RAND evidence on pipelines meets the evidence standards under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. The student achievement results qualify as Tier 2 evidence, and the principal retention results qualify as Tier 3. As many of you know, this makes principal pipelines eligible for Title I funding under ESSA in addition to Title II. So what does all this mean for districts, universities, and states around the nation? At the Wowoce Foundation, we believe the evidence suggests that the creation of principal pipelines aligned with the evidence base deserves serious consideration by large districts, understanding that they can adapt the approach to their local context and use Title I funds to do so, by universities as a critical partner to districts in those efforts, and by states, which can create policies that encourage and support building effective pipelines in their large districts. In the past several decades, as a nation, we've made some gains towards providing educational opportunities for all children, but we still have a very long way to go. Effective principals, well-prepared and supported by pipelines, can accelerate this progress. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Ms. Santelises for some Q&A.
Great, thank you very much. And what I'm going to do is invite all of you who are live here to proceed to the microphone to my right if you have questions that you'd like to ask. And as you gather and kind of get some of your ideas together, you can head over. I would also like to point out to the left, we will have members of the team here who will be taking questions from our live streaming audience. Those who have joined us via live stream, you too can submit your questions and we'll alternate between the two of them. As we wait for folks to ask questions, I would like if everyone here could join me in just a round of congratulatory applause for my four colleagues here for just sharing their work. Great, and we have a couple of folks headed to the microphone. So we want to start, do we want to start with one from live stream? And then we'll move here.
Great. So first question from our live stream audience. This is coming from Dr. Christine Kafka at UT Austin. And she asks, you elaborated a little bit on the partnerships between higher ed institutions and districts. They were really a big part of the pipeline work. Can you talk a little bit more about those partnerships specifically and how that was a crucial part of the pipeline?
Great.
Sure, I'll be glad to elaborate a little bit more on our partnerships with University of Tampa and University of South Florida in Hillsborough. So one of the challenges we have is definitely, with our highest need schools and ensuring, our tracking tool was doing, good with regard to finding best fits, but we really have to ensure at our highest need schools we have the right leader in place that has all the tools, in their toolbox to be effective. And so we really felt like, and we hear, because we've heard it all the way for the last 8 or 10 years, when you have to replace a principal, replace one that has a track record of success. Well, I don't know about many districts across the nation, but that bench is pretty empty, across the nation on when you have to replace several within your district. So it was really about developing capacity in our district for what turnaround leadership looks like. And so we reached out to University of South Florida and University of Tampa. They've developed that for us, an EDS program that really, kind of has a capstone project. Some of our district staff have gone through that too, just to make sure our chief of schools is a graduate of that particular program. So, we really value that. We think that great leaders, we have, through the principal pipeline, have really done a lot to pour into our leadership, but we really felt like these partners could even push our thinking even more.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I also want to add that I think whenever you talk about preparation of principals, certainly the Wallace Principal Pipeline or any other initiative such as we have, a Leadership Academy, does not replace what students should get in a higher ed program. The good part of that is hopefully what we do at the district level impacts and influences the curriculum that they use in the higher ed institution, because I think we have got the University of Georgia twice, I think, Dr. Pethel, that would do an evaluation of our program. And I think those things give some give and take on the part of both higher ed as well as the school district. And actually, we're the higher ed's customer. It's not the student. We hire their students, so we're really their customer.
That's great. And could you share with us your name and your question?
Sure. Mark Bedell, Superintendent of the Kansas City Public School District. We tend to deal with a lot of toxic stress in our schools that tend to fall in the lowest quintile performance or quartiles. And one of the things we also know is that the shelf life of highly performing principals and also teachers at those schools tend to be accelerated through burnout just because of some of the variables that they have to constantly overcome and deal with. So what I'm interested in wanting to know, in the years that you all have participated in this research, what has retention looked like in terms of shifts in these schools that tend to be in critical need, not only for the building leader, but also for the staff? Because I think that's something that we tend to deal with, a tremendous amount of turnover, not only with principals, but with staff, with teachers in some of these schools. And so I wanted to know if developing the principal and then that being able to permeate throughout the schools, has that made a difference with this research?
Great question. Somebody want to?
In Hillsborough, I will just say that stabilization is critical in our highest need schools, and that's what great leaders do. They stabilize staffs that have turned over for years and years and years and years. You put the right leader that has that right reputation, and the right support. That really is the key game changer, in our school district for staffs finally stabilizing, because we already know the student population is not stabilizing. There's a lot of in and out for our students, and so that's why we have to build capacity across our districts, because no matter where those students go, and they will usually go amongst 4 or 5 of our schools, we have to have great leaders there, great teachers, and so we have to commit to the work. We have to build the capacity in our school districts, and so that's just another way that I said earlier. You want to think of how you use your money wisely and invest your money wisely. Great leaders supporting great teachers, getting great results, and that ultimately is what we're supposed to be using our budgets to do anyway. And so we keep our dollars within those types of effective types of strategies, and we get a huge return on investment.
I just want to add that part of that turnover exists when you don't prepare the principal for the experience that they're going to have when they get to that building. And so putting that true investment in the preparation process allows them to be able to tackle the issues that they face every day. It's the part of it, though, is also that you hear their voice. Mm-hmm. So when those principals are saying to you, I have a staff and a very transient population that experiences things that we could never think or imagine, then we figure out ways to make an investment to support that principal. We don't just pat them on the back and tell them, oh, you have the tools in your toolkit to handle that. They're an instructional leader. And so we, in specific cases, put what we call a community resource advocate in the building to help to deal with those social-emotional supports and needs so that they could continue to focus on instruction.
Can I just add one more thing to this?
Please.
Because I think that's $1 million question. Especially, I've never seen a school community that has been historically underserved that is in a wealthy part of town, wherever you live.
That's right.
So by definition,
That's right.
they're going to be dealing with issues that in many cases are traumatic to students, but are traumatic to the adults that are serving the students. So if you don't take a trauma-informed approach around how you support not only children, but you support communities and you support those adults, then you're going to be setting people up for burnout. So what we've tried to do in New York City is, as Monica has said and Jeff has said, we listen to our principals. I mean, part of this is really listening. What are the conditions? But number two, we've really invested in a community schools approach where we build community-based organizations. We build municipal agencies that work with, and we have community-based coordinators that work with principals side by side to get the appropriate interventions, agencies, supports to serve the needs in those communities. We've also invested, quite frankly, in implicit bias training for every one of our employees, because one of the things you have to understand, I tweet something at the beginning of every school year. It's a little girl's quote, and it says, a teacher thought I was smarter than I was, so I was. Now, why is that important? Because in many of our communities, we know that how adults perceive kids has a direct impact not only of the children, but also on how the adults see their job.
That's right.
So this is all integrated. There's no one answer, but the one thing I would say is that you have to understand that if you don't look at the work from a trauma-informed perspective, especially in an urban environment, you are going to burn out your people. And that's part of the longevity as well.
Great. Thank you all. Another question from our live stream.
This one comes in from the National Association of State Boards of Education. They're having a watch party in Washington, D.C. right now. They asked, how and why were the 4 principal pipeline components chosen? And I think I'm going to turn that to you, Will Miller.
Sure. They were chosen based on the state of the evidence base in 2011. So the Wallace Foundation looked at the research on what makes for effective principals and how they get prepared, and identified these 4 components from what was then known about effective leadership in school-based settings. In effect, they were a hypothesis. All right, the evidence base suggested if you did these 4 things, you should get the kind of results that were achieved by these 6 districts. And that's what this initiative has been, is in effect, a test of the hypothesis drawn from the then best understanding of what was needed.
Great. Thank you. Next question here. And let us know who you are, even though
Nancy
I know who you are.
Gutierrez, CEO, New York City Leadership Academy.
Great.
The question is, what is getting in the way of us recruiting and retaining principals of color?
Yes. Very important question. Somebody want to jump in on that one?
I'll start. I think we are getting in our own way in many cases. So we dazzle ourselves with our brilliance and our processes. And I think if we take a good look at how do we go to communities, how do we go to our partners, how do we identify the bench? Critically important. Who are those potential leaders that you're stalking in your bench as you move people into different areas or they take advantage of different opportunities? It takes a really hard look at what you do. So when I say we get in our own way, that's one of them. The second thing is this whole notion of who you recruit, and who do you put together is critically important. You have to have a cultural lens. You have to have a culturally relevant lens. You have to understand what the work is in these communities. And it's not that somebody should or has to have been born and raised in a certain community to be able to lead in that community, but you have to have an affiliation. You have to have an orientation. You have to have a lens for culturally relevant, responsive leadership. And then, quite frankly, you have to be able to build your team. So part of what we've learned in New York City as well is that we've done everything that everybody else has done as well. We've paid stipends, we've done all kinds of incentives to get teachers to move to schools. But the one factor that is irrefutable is if you have a good leader, people will follow that leader. And we have found that that has happened in New York City as well. I mean, they'll travel across boroughs and pay tolls on bridges to go work in a school with a great leader. So having that kind of a leader with that kind of an orientation is really, really important. And quite frankly, we have done, and I'm going to use this writ large in public education, we've done a poor job of really giving opportunities to leaders of color. Who are they? How are we really clear about what the role is? How are we really clear to that teacher that's doing a phenomenal job, who is a kid magnet? You should become an administrator. I'm going to help you. We need to be able to do some of that kind of in the weeds recruitment as well to give people the opportunities that they should have.
And I would just add on that, and again, I'm not on the panel, but one of the things I will say that we are finding is when you actually have conversations with aspiring leaders of color, one of the things they are saying is that we within our own systems have vestiges of bias. And so who we select for which experience, how we privilege the ability to, quote, talk about instruction, right, with all of the bells and whistles, as opposed to folks who already have the connection to the community, as opposed to folks who already have an understanding of what's going on and prioritize, right, building on the other components, actually is a reflection, frankly, of the implicit bias that is inherent in our own images of what constitutes leadership. Now, I'm just telling you that we haven't even begun the pipeline, but that is hitting us loud and clear. You can look at it in some of the vestiges of it in some of the research that Ed Trust has done around teachers of color, the kinds of tasks that they are given, which are usually tasks that are not connected to, again, what our profile of leaders are. So I think we, and I can say this, right, because we got systems leaders here, we have to do some mirror reflection work ourselves in terms of the signals we're given and who we are identifying as potential leaders. So I will just add that little bit. As we're talking about this, we talk a lot about bias, but we don't often look and acknowledge that we're breathing in some of that same air that we accuse other institutions around us of doing. And I think we have our own bias work to do in that area too.
Hey.
And if I may, as someone who's researched career paths of school leaders for many years, agreeing with everything that's been said, the one other thing that I would add, if you look at the teacher workforce, it is not as diverse as the student population. And to the extent that we're drawing school leaders from that workforce, that's an area where changes that have already been discussed could really have an impact as well.
Do we want to go to the live stream again?
Another question from the live stream audience. This is from the National Association of Secondary School Principals Watch Party in Delaware. They asked, were any SEAs or state DOEs engaged as partners in these districts' pipeline initiatives, and if so, how?
Great. Does anybody have a state partner? Oh, okay. Well, that's
All right.
telling. That's telling. Okay. So.
Yeah, state partnerships were
Please.
not part of this initiative, which really focused on, I think at some points it was described as district as consumer, but the focus was really on districts and getting districts to embrace this notion of the principal pipeline and be the lead on that.
Jeff, did you want to?
I can say that, though, that this work has got to be a conversation presented to our state partners, because many of the things and challenges that we deal with as school superintendents and building level leaders and district leaders are things that come at us rather than maybe more in collaboration with what works. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to really engage our state leaders around what's effective strategy.
Good. Thank you for that. Great. Another question?
Hi, my name is Kristen Bijour. I'm from San Francisco Unified. And I know that you all have done some interesting work in rethinking how we assess principals. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you've learned by revising how we evaluate and assess principals.
Evaluation. Somebody want to jump in?
Well, I think because, and I can speak because I've been in Hillsborough County for 30 years, so I've seen it from a teacher perspective, a building level principal perspective. I've seen it now as the superintendent in over the span of 30 years. I would say that getting what I said earlier, getting the pipeline aligned the right way with our principal supervisors and our whole system supporting the work of effective leaders well, and really having the conversations. I think that leaders, maybe initially in our school district, I will say, was a challenge. They had not heard the kind of growth opportunities that perhaps they really needed to hear in order to become better at their craft. And so I feel like that's something I just want to put out there, for those districts, is you have to realize there's going to be some tension in that to predict that, and also to know how to ease that as much as possible for high-quality building level leaders, because the last people you want to create extra tension for are your greatest principals out there in your school. So I think as you do this work, just know that's an important evaluation, and coaching and support are critical in this work. It's how you have those conversations and being respectful in those conversations as you build people's leadership capacity is key to the ultimate effectiveness and sustainability of the work.
I just want to add, I'll add to what Jeff said. What's also key is having your principal supervisors have true conversations with your principals that you're not going to be perfect, that every principal has room to grow. And by already starting that conversation at the beginning of the year, when they get their mid-year and their end-of-the-year evaluation, it's not a I gotcha. It's these are areas that we have to work together to improve. And moving from a system of focusing on managerial strategies and moving more towards true instructional leadership strategies takes a lot of work and time, because it's easy to fall on management. It's harder to focus on instruction.
I was just going to add that I think when you talk about adding or providing support and evaluation, the two go together. and you cannot separate what you're supporting the person in doing from what you're evaluating them on, or you should not do that. You should evaluate them on whatever it takes to really be a principal, going back to those on-the-job things that they're supposed to do each and every day. There is this mythical theory out there that leadership is, you can't see it. I contend you can see it, just as you can walk down the hallway. If you know what good instructions is and looks like, you can tell if it's going on in a classroom. I think you can do that in a school with a principal. There are certain things that they should do each and every day, and that should be part of the evaluation.
Could we go back to the live stream for a question?
Another question from Ashley Fisher, no affiliation mentioned, but you mentioned leader tracking systems. I think several of you did. And could you elaborate a bit more on what those look like and how they work?
So in Hillsborough, it's really about getting all the right data, creating the right profiles, both on behalf of the leader, potential leader, and the school, that you literally are trying to make that match. And so it's making sure that your data systems are filled with the right types of profiles on both of those in order to, really make that marriage happen appropriately. Making sure you have the right fit, you're thinking of all the right qualities. There's always going to be situations. There's always going to be things that are arising in communities that you have to also play into that. You can't just use a tracking system and not let all those local issues play into some of the ways you make the final decision. But at least those local issues are going to help better inform a best decision for who's the right leader at those schools.
We too have an extensive profile of our leaders, our instructional leaders, so that we can make the best fit. We call it a baseball card. And so you use that information to help to figure out what's the best place for that person, because you want them to be ultimately successful.
I would just add, in New York City, everything's a little bit different because of the size. So we have 1,800 schools, 46 superintendents, each of whom has a portfolio of schools. So the direction that I've given to our superintendents is that they need to know the DNA of every one of the schools in their portfolio. They need to, at any given moment, if I say, who is your best math teacher, they can take me right to that classroom. But because of that, they are intimately now familiar with, and this is assuming that all of the evaluation systems are in place, everybody's adhering to that, the goals are clear, the communication is clear, but knowing those school communities and knowing who's transitioning, who's going to be in the new position is critically important. So it becomes really, really challenging at a systems level. You add to that the fact that in New York City we have mayoral control, but what that means is that there are certain legislatively memorialized things that communities get to do in the selection of principals. One of those things is we have a process where communities get to inform, be on the interview panel for principals. And one of the things that we really have tried to hold a line on is that, you don't always want it to be a popularity contest because there are certain things that we know that you need to be able to do to move a school community, and I, as a chancellor, have to have the ultimate authority to make an appointment based on everything we've heard, everybody's input, but still knowing where we want to get to and who's capacitated to be able to do that kind of work. So it's a little more challenging, but it's not undoable in New York City, as obviously we've learned a lot from this Wowoce study.
I was just going to add that in large districts, I think sometimes you can forget about people. They can be hidden. With a leader tracking system, it gives you an opportunity to really make sure you haven't forgot people. Well, I know my district, we have a leadership academy, and as they finish, they obviously all want to be a principal. The last class is the one that's fresh on everybody's mind. So if you don't watch some of those that didn't get chosen, that may have the talents and the skills, a skill set, talent pool, knowledge base that a particular school needs. With the leader tracking system, this allows you to go back and see what those particular skills and talents that person possesses. And I think our associates and assistant superintendents do a good job of that. But just every now and then, I'll ask what happened to so-and-so. because all indications I get, they're doing what they're supposed to do and probably would make a good principal. But I just want to make sure that they're reviewed.
Very good. Thank you.
If I may
Please.
just comment, it's interesting to hear all of the chancellor and the superintendents talk about the leader tracking systems as if they're just a natural thing. But the reality is, this was a big lift for the pipeline districts. If we go back to 2011, the notion of the leader tracking system was overwhelming in some cases. And, I think districts embarking on this type of an effort might want to think about the fact that school districts tend to be very data rich but information poor. Yeah. And what the leader tracking systems do is they pull together that information that you would most want in order to make that eHarmony match, to have that information at your fingertips. It's not easy to get it because it might be in 10 different offices around the district. So there was intentional thought that goes into what you need to make that eHarmony match, what you want on the baseball card, as they call it in Prince George's County. And then also what information you want to track whether your leaders are doing well and whether your pre-service providers are doing well. So I just wanted to make sure not to minimize the tremendous effort that really went into creating those systems as well.
Thank you for pointing that out, because that was not an automatic at all. Please.
Good morning. I'm Shakri Eldali. I'm a leadership coach and consultant. My question is around some of the dangers of pipelines. We know pipelines often encourage the facsimile replication of certain types of leaders. We know they can be silos. We know they can be echo chambers. And we know it's in these spaces that often those most important fringe voices become silenced. We know we've lost lots of good leaders as a result. We know there are people who haven't had opportunity to step into leadership roles as a result of pipelines. So my question is around how do we protect those fringe voices and get that valuable information that they have so that we can all learn and really benefit from it?
Great question.
I think that has to come up front. If you don't ever get any pipeline, then you may not be looked at. So I think we need to do everything we can do to make sure that the people who need to be in the pipeline are applying to get in the pipeline, or certainly sometimes it means that I know we are really struggling for African-American males to be assistant principals and principals. We just don't have a pool of those. So we're doing something about that with African-American males that are teaching in the district. So we're trying to seek out, and pretty soon we'll have a formal program that will help us identify those people where we can maybe encourage them to get into administrative track.
I think you have to analyze who's in your pipeline, the demographics of your pipeline. And then whichever area is not being addressed, you really truly have to look to find those people within your organization so that you can go to them and get them to apply. In many cases, when we've approached people who have not applied, they just didn't see themselves. They didn't see people who looked like them. And so they had already made a decision not to move forward. But after being asked, it changes how they perceive and look at it.
Yeah, if I could use one word in Hillsborough, it's been around intentionality. It really has. You have to, in order to make sure your pool of candidates is diverse, it has, you have to literally start all the way down at our classroom level. You can't also think just within the boundaries of your school district. You have to think outside of your school district as far as who could offer value as an effective leader in your school district. I mean, we are literally mining all the time at our classroom level those potential next leaders in our school district now that we never did before. It was all by happenstance. It was always, do you want to go back into educational leadership? That was always an individual's decision. It's really not anymore. It's really all about giving them opportunities, first of all, to show they have those leadership skills, whether it's demonstration classrooms or being a instructional coach and then having somebody get in their ear and say, you know what, we recognize this about you. Have you ever thought about, you have to be intentional about it. So I think that's really what we have become more in Hillsborough, all about intentionality in order to make sure our candidate pool is full with all different candidates and very diverse as well.
I'm just going to add one thing to what everybody said. I'm so proud of my colleagues because I think one thing that you've heard every single person, including our moderator, Sonja, passionately talk about is that you're always looking for leaders. That is a standing directive in the DOE, Department of Education, that you're always looking for the next leader. So if you're an assistant principal, you're looking at who are teachers that have leadership qualities. If you're a principal, you're looking at assistant principals. If you're a superintendent, and all the way up the chain. So one of the things that I love is Alvin, who has an incredibly large school system, said something that is very, very important. He said that he will ask, hey, what about that particular candidate? Where is that person? So if you have the superintendent asking, what about that person? I guarantee you the organization is going to say, wait a minute, he's paying attention.
That's
right? And I think for us, I'll just say a superintendent or a chancellor in the field is worth 3 in the seat. So we have to be out and about. We have to be out looking and driving the message for all of us. We don't teach any children any single day of the. I don't know about you guys, I don't. So the value that I add as a chancellor is that the vision, that the spirit of what we're looking for in leadership is consistently being communicated. And I don't want people that are cut from the same cloth. That's where it's really important to understand what is the community, what are the needs, and how do you do that eHarmony match? Because if you're looking for the cookie cutter candidate, you're going to go through a lot of leaders because they're not going to be matched well.
That's right. Nicely said from the full panel. Glad we all weighed in on that one. We have time for one last question.
Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ann. Go ahead.
Mark Schellinger, National Salmon Innovation Project. Well, first, thanks to the districts who did the work, and thanks to the researchers who've given us this information, and thanks, of course, to the Wallace Foundation for the work they've done in this field. There isn't anyone like you, so thank you, Wallace Foundation. Here's my question. Research is only valuable if it makes you think. So as district leaders, how are you thinking differently? What would you do differently if you were starting this process again? Or if it's easier to look at it, what will you do differently now?
So we're giving them some nice wait time for this, and given that this is that was a meaty question, and I think those of us, again, who are at the beginning of this trajectory, at least I can speak for myself, learn the most from when people reflect back on the experience and are able to give those of us who come after them some good advice. So hopefully I gave you some wait time, and anybody want to launch in?
I'll start. I'm not a big proponent of going backwards. I believe that you learn from every experience. So every bump and obstacle that we had on our way helped us to get to where we are now. So if I had to go back in time and create a perfect picture, then I wouldn't have learned the lessons I've learned, and we wouldn't have the scrapes and bumps to prove it, and to be able to truly be a valuable partner to other districts to say, this was what was successful and this is what was not. I think what we do have to go back and look at, as with anything, we're not perfect, of what's worked and what didn't, and what we have to do right to make sure that it's the right work. Where were we able to get the most bang for our buck, and how can we expand that?
I think in moving forward, it's really about the work and around collaboration across so many partners in school districts. I think that really, for us, that pushed us from 2011 to 2018. It's going to continue to push us going forward. We've got to continue to sharpen each other's saws along the way and appreciate that. I think that's part of, we got to admit sometimes we don't know it all, and we don't. And so it's all the voices that have really come in from all the people in this room, from the partners that worked with us along the way, has really helped us to be who we are today, and will only help us to get better moving forward.
I also want to say, moving forward, I think what's important is we now have a definitive study that gives us great information on which we can hang our hats, whether it's in the budget process, whether it's in the policy arena, or it's just good practice. We now have something that we can quantify that says in these 4 areas, good things happen if you pay attention.
I think one of the things that I'm going to do is make a good review of the study, and then call my colleagues of the things that I feel like they're doing better than I'm doing, and that way maybe I can catch up with them.
Well, I want to thank you all, and I just want to highlight one theme as I get ready to turn it back over to Mr. Will Miller. And that is one of the threads you heard throughout the panel was that this work would not have been possible were it not for the Wallace Foundation. And unlike a lot of foundations, I'm not jumping from lily pad to lily pad, but sticking with school leadership, sticking with districts, and really being committed to on-the-ground learning. So as a way of saying thank you, I will turn it back over to Will Miller.
Well, thank you. So I want to So on behalf of the Wallace Foundation, I would like to thank our panelists today, Susan Gates, School Chiefs Sonja Santelises, Richard Carranza, Jeff Eakins, Monica Goldson, and Alvin Wilbanks. They and their districts and all of the people on the ground have made possible the learning that we've had over the last several years. This is pioneering work and the basis for important findings you've heard about today. But from the Wallace Foundation's point of view, what the rest of the field does with it going forward is as important as what these 6 districts have done to benefit the children in each of their communities. We care about both, and so we're very proud of them and hope that others will pay attention and be inspired. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us today, both at Baruch College and online. We encourage you to visit www.wallacefoundation.org/principal pipeline to learn more about how building principal pipelines can produce significant benefits for large districts, for schools, and for students. Thank you very much.